The sweltering heat radiating from the Chicago asphalt in mid-July was nothing compared to the icy chill that shot down Rafael Montenego's spine when a tiny hand, filthy with street grime and trembling violently, suddenly clutched the hem of his expensive three-piece black suit. Rafael, the most notorious mafia boss in the entire Midwest, a man whose single nod could determine the fate of an underground empire worth over $500 million, stopped dead in his tracks. He was only 3 steps away from his gleaming black Bentley, the car that represented the pinnacle of his absolute power. He was accustomed to people bowing their heads as he passed, accustomed to not a single soul daring to look him in the eye, let alone touch him. Yet someone had just done exactly that. He looked down, his steel-gray eyes narrowing, his jaw clenched so tight that his temple muscle twitched, ready to order his bodyguards to drag away whoever had dared breach his security perimeter. But the words died in his throat when he met a pair of blue eyes, enormous and sunken deep from malnutrition, filled with absolute terror, staring straight at him. It was a little girl, so emaciated that her collarbones protruded sharply beneath her pallid skin. No more than 6 years old. She wore no hat, her dirty blonde hair tangled like a bird's nest cascading over her bony shoulders. She wore an oversized gray hoodie with a torn shoulder, clearly an adult's garment, and old jeans with ripped knees stained with grime that could never be washed clean. Her feet were clad in sneakers with torn toes, exposing tiny toes blackened with street dust. On her left arm, visible beneath the baggy sleeve, there was a small round scar, like an old cigarette burn that had long since healed. Her left hand clutched a small, worn wicker basket containing a few pieces of candy, which she had been trying to sell to passers-by in the bustling financial district. But her right hand remained clamped onto the sleeve of Raphael's tailored suit, her tiny fingers gripping so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, refusing to let go. "Sir," her voice whispered, hoarse and trembling with fear, her eyes darting quickly toward the Bentley parked at the curb, before locking back onto his as if trying to convey a life-or-death message. "Please don't get in that car." Why would an emaciated street child know something that the Mafia boss's elite security team had completely missed? And what awaited Raphael inside that luxurious car? Raphael's first instinct was cold irritation. His lip curled into a sneer as he reached down to pry the child's fingers from his sleeve. "Let go of me," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Get out of here before I have my men remove you." But the little girl did not release her grip. Instead, she pulled harder on his sleeve, her tiny body straining with effort, her feet scraping against the hot pavement. Her blue eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made something deep in Raphael's chest tighten uncomfortably. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Please, sir, you have to listen to me." Raphael opened his mouth to summon Victor or Nikolai to dispose of this street urchin. But something stopped him. Something in the way she looked at him. He had seen many eyes in his 37 years, eyes filled with greed, fear, hatred, desperate pleas for mercy. He knew the look of a beggar hoping for spare change. He knew the look of a con artist running a scam. This was none of those. This was the look of someone trying to save a life. This skeletal child was not asking him for anything. She was trying to give him something. A warning. Raphael's steel-gray eyes shifted imperceptibly toward the Bentley. Victor stood by the rear door, hand on the handle. Nikolai lingered near the front, scanning the street. Both men had been recommended by Marco just this morning, replacing his regular security team for necessary precautions during the merger negotiations. The merger, the $500 million deal that would make Raphael the sole owner, the deal that would leave Marco with nothing, unless Raphael never made it to the signing. "Why?" Raphael whispered, crouching slightly toward the child. "Should I not get in that car?" The girl swallowed hard, glancing toward Victor and Nikolai before quickly looking away. "I heard them talking," she whispered frantically. "The 2 men in black suits. I was sitting behind the dumpster. They didn't see me. Nobody ever sees me." Her voice broke on those last words, carrying unbearable loneliness. "They said there's something under the back seat. When you close the door, they'll push a button. And then..." She couldn't finish. Her eyes said everything. Raphael felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. "What language?" he asked, barely breathing. "Were they speaking?" "Russian," the little girl whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a winter storm. "They were speaking Russian. I understand Russian. My mama taught me before she went away." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them back fiercely, as if crying was a luxury she had long ago learned she could not afford. Raphael felt his pulse quicken, though his face remained an impenetrable mask of stone. "Russian," His new bodyguards spoke Russian when they thought no one was listening. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Every word." The girl nodded, her grip on his sleeve loosening slightly now that she knew he was listening. She glanced nervously toward the dumpster across the street, the rusted metal container that had apparently served as her hiding spot. "I was sitting behind that dumpster," she began, her words coming faster now. "My feet hurt from walking all day, and it was shady there. I just wanted to rest for a few minutes before selling more candy. The two tall men were standing by your car. They didn't know I was there. Nobody ever knows I'm there." She paused, swallowing hard. "The one with the scar on his neck?" He said something like, "The explosive is under the back seat. When the target closes the door, we activate. Job done. We disappear. And the other one, the bigger one," he laughed and said, "easiest 10 million we'll ever make." 10 million. The number echoed in Raphael's mind like a gunshot. That was a professional hit. That was the kind of money only someone with access to serious resources could offer. Someone like Marco DeVito, Raphael's strategic mind, the same mind that had built an empire from nothing and crushed every rival who dared challenge him, began connecting the pieces with ruthless efficiency. Marco had insisted on replacing his regular security team just this morning. Marco had claimed it was for enhanced protection during the critical merger week. Marco had personally vouched for Victor and Nikolai, two men whose backgrounds Raphael had not had time to verify. And just last week, Marco had pressured him relentlessly to sign the succession clause, the document that would transfer full control of the empire to Marco in the event of Raphael's sudden death. At the time, Raphael had dismissed his unease as paranoia. Marco was his right hand, his brother in all but blood, the man who had stood beside him through 15 years of warfare and bloodshed. But betrayal always came from those closest to you. That was the first lesson Raphael had learned on the streets of Chicago. Slowly, deliberately, Raphael turned his head to observe his two new bodyguards. Victor, the taller one with the surgical scar on his neck, stood rigidly by the Bentley's rear door. His eyes were hidden behind dark sunglasses, but his posture was tense, coiled like a snake ready to strike. And then Raphael saw it. Victor's right hand slipped casually inside his suit jacket, his fingers caressing something hidden beneath the fabric. It was a subtle movement, almost invisible to anyone not trained to notice such things. But Raphael noticed. That was not where a man kept his gun. That was where a man kept something smaller, something electronic, a remote detonator. Raphael's mind shifted into survival mode, every instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. He had mere seconds to act before Victor's finger found that button. "Listen to me very carefully," he whispered to the girl, his voice barely audible. "I'm going to pretend to scold you for dirtying my suit. When I say go away, you walk slowly toward the alley behind that glass building. Do not run. Do not look back. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, her blue eyes wide with fear, but then she did something that caught Raphael completely off guard. "What about you?" she asked, her tiny voice filled with genuine concern. "What will happen to you, sir?" Raphael stared at her, momentarily frozen. In 37 years of life, no one had ever asked him that question without an ulterior motive. Not his enemies, not his allies, not even the women who had shared his bed and spent his money. Everyone wanted something from Raphael Montenegro. Everyone calculated their own survival first. But this starving child, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, was worried about him. Something cracked in the ice around his heart. Just a fracture. But it was there. "I'll be fine," he said quietly. "Now do as I say." He straightened abruptly, releasing her arm with a dramatic gesture of disgust. His face twisted into a mask of arrogant contempt, the expression coming easily after years of practice. "Filthy street rat," he bellowed, loud enough for Victor and Nikolai to hear. "Look what you've done to my suit. Go away before I have you arrested." The girl flinched, but he caught the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She clutched her wicker basket to her chest and began shuffling toward the alley, her head bowed in apparent shame. Raphael turned away from the Bentley, adjusting his tie with practiced nonchalance. "Victor!" he called out, his voice carrying the bored tone of a man accustomed to giving orders. "I've forgotten the merger documents in my office. Wait here. I'll return in 5 minutes." He began walking toward the glass tower's entrance, each step measured and deliberate. 15 steps to the door. He counted them silently. Behind him, he sensed movement, heard the shuffle of expensive shoes on hot asphalt. Victor and Nikolai were exchanging glances, their carefully constructed plan crumbling with every step Raphael took away from the kill zone. 10 steps. "Mr. Montenegro," Victor called out, his accent suddenly thicker with stress. "We can retrieve the documents for you. Please, wait in the car where it's cool." 5 steps. Raphael did not turn around, did not slow down. 3 steps. Then he heard it. Nikolai's voice, sharp and panicked, hissing in Russian. "Activate now! He knows!" Raphael threw himself around the corner of the glass building. In the same instant, the world behind him erupted into hell. The explosion was catastrophic. A massive fireball, orange and crimson, swallowed the gleaming black Bentley whole. The force of the blast lifted the 2-ton vehicle nearly 2 meters off the ground before slamming it back down onto the pavement in a twisted heap of burning metal. The shockwave tore through the street like an invisible hurricane, shattering every window within a 50-meter radius. Glass rained down from the surrounding skyscrapers like deadly hail, glittering shards catching the afternoon sun as they fell. Raphael was hurled forward by the concussive force, his body slamming violently against the brick wall of the alley, his head cracked against the rough surface, and for a moment, his vision exploded into white static. He crumpled to the ground, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. Blood. He could taste it in his mouth, feel it trickling warm and wet down the side of his face from a gash above his eyebrow. His expensive 3-piece suit was torn and singed, covered in gray ash and debris. His hands were scraped raw from the impact, embedded with tiny fragments of glass that glinted like diamonds in his flesh. The world around him descended into absolute chaos. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear muffled screams, the wail of car alarms triggered by the blast, the distant shriek of approaching sirens. Thick black smoke billowed into the Chicago sky, blotting out the July sun and casting the financial district into an apocalyptic twilight. Raphael tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him. His vision swam, dark spots dancing at the edges. Concussion, possibly worse. He had survived enough violence in his life to recognize the symptoms, but he could not stay here. Victor and Nikolai would come looking for a body, and when they did not find one in the wreckage, they would hunt him down to finish the job. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Raphael dragged himself along the alley floor, leaving a smeared trail of blood on the concrete. Every movement sent jolt. At the far end of the alley, crouched behind a rusted dumpster, was the little girl. Her oversized gray hoodie was covered in dust and ash, her wicker basket still clutched protectively against her chest. She was trembling violently, her blue eyes enormous with terror. But she had waited for him. She had not run away to save herself. She had stayed. Raphael reached her, collapsing against the dumpster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The girl immediately knelt beside him, her small hand reaching out to touch his blood-streaked face with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the horror surrounding them. "We have to go now," Alina said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She grabbed his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his with surprising strength. "They will come looking for your body." Raphael had never followed anyone in his life. He gave orders. He led, he commanded. But now, stumbling through the labyrinth of Chicago's forgotten underbelly, he followed a 6-year-old girl as if his life depended on it. Because it did. Alina moved through the shadows like a ghost, her small body slipping through gaps in chain-link fences, ducking beneath broken pipes, navigating a maze of dark alleys that no city map had ever documented. She knew every turn, every hidden passage, every drainage tunnel that connected the gleaming towers of the financial district to the rotting bones of the city beneath. The contrast was grotesque. Rafael Montenegro, the most powerful mafia boss in the Midwest, dragged his bleeding body through filth and darkness, his torn 3-piece suit now indistinguishable from the rags of any common vagrant. And ahead of him, guiding him with the confidence of someone who had spent years surviving in this underworld, was a skeletal child who weighed less than his briefcase. They paused in a narrow gap between 2 crumbling buildings. Raphael leaned against the damp brick, fighting to catch his breath. His head throbbed mercilessly, and dark spots still danced at the edges of his vision. His hand brushed against his wrist, and he felt the cold platinum of his Patek Philippe, the watch worth more than most people earned in a decade. The watch with a built-in GPS tracker that his security team could locate anywhere in the world. The same security team that had just tried to kill him. Without hesitation, Raphael unclasped the watch. A delivery truck rumbled past the alley entrance, and he hurled the platinum timepiece into its open cargo bed. Let them chase that signal across the state. Next came his phone. He pulled it from his inner pocket, staring at the sleek device that connected him to his empire, his accounts, his entire existence. One call could summon a private army. One message could move millions. But one ping could also lead Victor and Nikolai straight to him. Raphael dropped the phone onto the concrete and crushed it beneath his heel. grinding the glass and circuitry into fragments. The finality of the act settled over him like a funeral shroud. He looked down at himself, at the blood and ash and torn fabric that had replaced his armor of wealth and power. He had nothing now. No money, no identification, no allies, no weapons. The man who had controlled $500 million could not even buy a bottle of water. The man whose word was law across 3 states was now invisible, nameless, hunted. "This way?" Alina whispered, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Not much farther." Raphael looked at her, this impossible child who had appeared from nowhere and torn his entire existence apart. "Where are you taking me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Alina paused, her blue eyes meeting his with an expression far too old for her 6 years. "I know a safe place," she said quietly. "But you will have to get used to the smell of garbage." The slum neighborhood swallowed them whole. A forgotten pocket of Chicago where poverty had rotted everything down to its bones. Crumbling brick buildings leaned against each other like drunken old men, their windows boarded or shattered, their walls covered in layers of graffiti and grime. Raphael limped alongside Alina, his vision still swimming, every step sending fresh waves of pain through his battered body. They passed hollow-eyed attics slumped in doorways, stray dogs picking through overturned garbage cans, and clusters of hard-faced men who watched them with predatory interest but did not approach. Perhaps even in his ruined state, something in Raphael's eyes warned them to keep their distance. Then Alina stopped abruptly. They stood before a small pawn shop, its barred windows thick with dust, its faded sign barely legible. Through the grimy glass, Raphael could see a battered television mounted on the wall, its screen flickering with the bright colors of a news broadcast. His own face stared back at him. Raphael froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen hit him like a physical blow. Breaking news. Mafia boss Rafael Montenegro killed in terrorist bombing. The footage showed his Bentley, or what remained of it, a twisted skeleton of blackened metal, still smoldering, surrounded by yellow police tape and emergency vehicles. FBI agents in dark jackets moved through the wreckage. Paramedics loaded a body bag into an ambulance. A body bag meant for him, but the worst was yet to come. The image cut to a live press conference, and there stood Marco DeVito, his mentor's right hand, his brother in all but blood, the man who had just tried to murder him. Marco's face was a masterpiece of manufactured grief. His eyes were red-rimmed, his voice cracking with emotion as he clutched a handkerchief in his trembling hand. He wore a black suit, as if he had already prepared for a funeral. Rafael Montenegro was not just my partner, Marco choked out, dabbing at non-existent tears. He was my brother, my family, the man who gave me everything I have. This senseless act of terrorism has stolen him from us. And I can barely find the words. Raphael's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white, his nails cutting crescents into his palms. In his memory, Marco continued, his voice steadying with practiced solemnity, "I will assume full control of his business operations. It is what he would have wanted, and I swear to all of you, I will spend the rest of my life hunting down the monsters responsible for this tragedy." The camera captured Marco's bowed head, his shoulders shaking with convincing sobs. Raphael watched his own funeral being performed by his murderer. Something cold and terrible crystallized in his chest. Not grief, not despair. Something far more dangerous, purpose. "He thinks he has 500 million reasons to celebrate tonight," Raphael whispered into the darkness, his voice low and lethal. "I will take back every single dollar, and then I will take his life." They climbed. Alina led Raphael up a rusted fire escape that groaned under their weight, through a broken window into an abandoned building that reeked of mold and decay, and finally up 3 flights of crumbling concrete stairs to the rooftop. "Here," Alina said softly, pulling aside a torn plastic tarp. "This is my home." Raphael stepped through and felt his heart stop. The home was a corner of the rooftop, sheltered by 2 unfinished brick walls and a makeshift roof constructed from scraps of blue tarp, flattened cardboard boxes, and pieces of rotting plywood. The space was barely large enough for a grown man to lie down. Inside this pathetic shelter, Raphael saw everything the child owned: a filthy mattress, stained and reeking of mildew, thin enough that the concrete beneath would offer no cushion from the cold; a plastic water bottle, reused so many times its label had worn away completely; a small pile of clothes, all too large, all torn, all gray with age and dirt; and in the corner, placed with obvious care on a folded scrap of cloth, sat a teddy bear. It was missing one eye and one arm, its brown fur matted and worn nearly bald in patches. Rafael Montenegro had walked through mansions with gilded ceilings. He had slept in penthouse suites that cost more per night than most families earned in a year. He had owned cars, planes, and properties scattered across 3 continents. But standing in this rooftop hovel, staring at the sum total of a 6-year-old girl's existence, he could not breathe. This was where she lived. This was where she slept. This was the kingdom of a child who had nothing and no one. "Sit down," Alina instructed, her voice taking on a surprisingly firm tone. "You're still bleeding." Rafael obeyed wordlessly, lowering himself onto the edge of the mattress. The springs creaked beneath him, and the smell of mildew filled his nostrils, but he barely noticed. Alina retrieved a plastic container filled with murky water and a small rag, the cleanest item she possessed. She knelt before him and began gently dabbing at the gash on his forehead, her tiny hands moving with careful precision. Rafael watched her in silence. In 37 years, no one had ever touched him like this. Every interaction in his life had been transactional. People served him because they feared him, because they wanted his money, because they needed his protection. Even the women who had warmed his bed had calculated the value of his affection in diamonds and real estate. But this child, who had nothing to gain, was cleaning his wounds with water she probably needed to drink herself. Her small fingers brushed across his temple, wiping away dried blood with a tenderness that made something deep inside Rafael's chest ache. "Why?" he asked suddenly, his voice rough. Alina paused, looking up at him with those enormous blue eyes. "Why did you save me?" Rafael continued, his gaze boring into hers. "I could be the worst man in this entire world." Alina was silent for a long moment, her tiny hands pausing in their work. She stared at the blood-stained rag in her fingers, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "My mama's name was Natasha." Rafael did not move, did not speak. He simply listened. "She came from Russia," Alina continued, her eyes distant, seeing something far beyond the brick walls that surrounded them. Bad men told her she could have a good job in America. They said she would work in a restaurant and send money back to her family. But they lied. Her small shoulders trembled. They brought her here and locked her in a house with other women. They did bad things to her, terrible things. But Mama was brave. She escaped when she found out she was going to have me. She ran away in the middle of winter with nothing but the clothes she was wearing. Alina picked up the one-eyed teddy bear from its place of honor and held it against her chest. She gave birth to me in an abandoned warehouse. There was no doctor, no medicine, just Mama and the snow and me. She said I almost didn't survive that first night, but she held me against her heart and kept me warm until morning. Rafael felt something crack inside his chest, a fracture spreading through walls he had spent decades building. "We lived under bridges," Alina said softly. "We ate food from the garbage cans behind restaurants. Mama taught me Russian lullabies and told me stories about the sunflower fields where she grew up. She said one day we would have a real home with a yellow door and flowers in the window." Her voice broke, but Mama got sick. She coughed all the time, and sometimes there was blood, so much blood. I begged people on the street to help us. I begged the doctors at the hospital, but nobody cared. We had no money, no papers. We were invisible. Alina lifted her sleeve, revealing not just the cigarette burn Rafael had noticed before, but a constellation of scars, some round, some long and thin, mapped across her pale skin. Mama died in an alley when I was 5. I held her hand until she stopped breathing. Then the police came and put me in foster care. Her jaw tightened with a hardness no child should possess. The first family locked me in the basement and starved me. The second family, the older boy burned me with cigarettes when his parents weren't looking. The third family called me the bastard daughter of a Russian whore. Rafael's hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. He had ordered men killed for lesser offenses. "So I ran away," Alina said simply. "I've been living here ever since." She looked up at Rafael, her blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Before Mama died, she made me promise one thing. She said, 'Alina, the world is cold, but you must never let your heart freeze. If you can save someone from dying alone, save them. The world turned its back on Mama, but you must never become as cold as the world.'" Alina touched her chest, where her heart beat beneath the thin fabric of her hoodie. "That's why I saved you, because Mama asked me to, because I promised." The rooftop fell silent, except for the distant wail of sirens somewhere in the city below. And then something happened that had not occurred in over 30 years. Rafael Montenegro, the most ruthless mafia boss in Chicago, the man who had watched enemies die without flinching, felt hot tears spill down his blood-streaked cheeks. He reached out and pulled Alina into his arms, holding her frail body against his chest as if she were made of glass. She stiffened at first, unaccustomed to gentle touch, but then slowly, hesitantly, her tiny arms wrapped around his neck. "I swear to you," Raphael whispered, his voice cracking, "I will protect you with my life." Raphael's eyes snapped open before his mind fully registered why. The gray light of early dawn filtered through the gaps in the tarp above them. The city was still quiet, that eerie stillness that existed only in the hour before Chicago truly awakened. Alina lay curled beside him on the moldy mattress, her small body pressed against his side for warmth, her one-eyed teddy bear clutched to her chest. Then he heard it again. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, military precision, coming from somewhere below. Raphael's body shifted into combat mode instantly, every muscle tensing, every sense sharpening to a razor's edge. He had survived too many assassination attempts, too many gang wars, too many midnight raids to ignore the warning bells screaming in his skull. Moving with the silent grace of a predator, he crawled to the edge of the rooftop and peered down through a gap in the crumbling brick wall. His blood ran cold. Victor and Nikolai stood in the alley 3 floors below. Their faces bore fresh burns, the skin red and blistered from standing too close to the explosion they had triggered. Victor's neck was wrapped in white bandages, and Nikolai's left eyebrow was completely singed off. They had survived, and they were hunting. A teenage boy stood before them, his posture shifting nervously from foot to foot. Raphael recognized the type immediately, a street kid willing to sell any information for the right price. Victor pulled a thick roll of cash from his pocket and pressed it into the boy's eager hands. Words were exchanged, too quiet for Raphael to hear from this distance. Then the teenager turned and pointed directly at the abandoned building, at Alina's home. Raphael's heart slammed against his ribs. He pulled back from the edge, his mind racing through options with brutal efficiency. The fire escape they had used to climb up was the only way down. If Victor and Nikolai were already entering the building, that route was sealed. They would be trapped like rats, cornered on a rooftop with no weapons and nowhere to run. A small hand touched his arm. Raphael turned to find Alina awake, her blue eyes wide with terror. She had seen the expression on his face, and despite her age, she understood exactly what it meant. Death was climbing the stairs. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The men from yesterday." Raphael nodded grimly. He could already hear the heavy footsteps echoing in the stairwell below, growing louder with each passing second. 2 flights away, maybe less. His eyes swept across the rooftop, searching desperately for any advantage, any weapon, any escape route. Then his gaze landed on the adjacent building, separated from them by a gap of roughly 2 meters. The roof was lower, cluttered with old ventilation equipment and debris. It was possible, barely. "Alina," Raphael whispered urgently, gripping her thin shoulders. "Can you jump to that rooftop next door?" Raphael's eyes swept across the rooftop with the cold precision of a man who had turned countless environments into killing grounds. In the corner, half hidden beneath a rotting piece of plywood, he spotted exactly what he needed. An old propane tank, rusted but not empty. He could see the gauge still showing a quarter full. Beside it, a tangle of exposed electrical wires dangled from a junction box that had long ago been stripped for copper but never fully disconnected. Gas and electricity. The oldest trap in the book. The footsteps in the stairwell grew louder. 1 flight away now. "Alina," Raphael commanded, his voice low but urgent. "Jump to the next building. Now." The little girl scrambled to her feet, clutching her teddy bear. She ran to the edge of the rooftop and looked down at the gap, her face pale. Then she turned back. "What about you?" she asked, her blue eyes searching his face. "You have to come too." Something twisted in Raphael's chest. Even now, facing death, this child worried about him. "I'll be right behind you," he promised. "Go, now." Alina hesitated for 1 more heartbeat, then took 3 steps back, ran toward the edge, and leaped. Her small body sailed through the morning air, her oversized hoodie billowing like broken wings. She landed hard on the adjacent rooftop, rolling across the gravel before scrambling to her feet. Safe. Raphael moved with lethal efficiency. He dragged the propane tank to the center of the rooftop, directly in front of the stairwell door. His fingers found the valve and twisted it open. The hiss of escaping gas filled the air, invisible but deadly. Next, he grabbed the exposed electrical wires, careful not to let them touch. He positioned them precisely at ankle height across the doorway, their bare copper ends mere inches apart. The door to the stairwell burst open. Victor emerged first, his burned face twisted with murderous rage, a pistol raised and ready. His eyes found Raphael instantly. "There you are," Victor snarled in Russian. Raphael was already running. He sprinted toward the edge of the rooftop, his legs pumping, his lungs burning. Behind him, he heard Nikolai shout a warning, heard Victor's boots pounding against the concrete in pursuit. Victor's foot caught the electrical wires. The spark was small, almost insignificant, but it was enough. The propane gas that had been pooling across the rooftop ignited with a thunderous roar. A wall of blue and orange flame erupted between Raphael and his pursuers, the heat so intense it singed the back of his neck. Victor and Nikolai screamed as the fire engulfed them, their already burned flesh searing anew. They stumbled backward, flailing, trying desperately to escape the inferno. Raphael reached the edge of the rooftop and jumped. For one terrifying moment, he was suspended in empty air, the alley yawning beneath him like a hungry mouth. Then he crashed onto the adjacent roof, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact, pain exploding through his arm. Alina was at his side immediately, helping him to his feet. Behind them, the screams continued, punctuated by the crackling roar of flames consuming Alina's former home. "They won't die from that," Raphael gasped, clutching his injured shoulder. "But we just bought ourselves some time." They ran for nearly an hour, weaving through back alleys and abandoned lots, until Raphael was certain they had lost any possible pursuit. His shoulder throbbed with every step, but he pushed the pain aside. Pain was a luxury he could not afford. As they rested in the shadow of a crumbling warehouse, Raphael's mind worked furiously through his limited options. He needed allies. He needed resources. He needed someone on the outside who could help him strike back at Marco. And then he thought of her. Detective Sarah Chen. She had been investigating Raphael for nearly a decade, building case after case that never quite stuck. She was relentless, incorruptible, and infuriatingly competent. Every other cop in Chicago had a price. Sarah Chen did not. Raphael had respected her for that, even as she tried to put him behind bars. He remembered their last encounter, 3 years ago, when she had cornered him outside a restaurant after another failed prosecution. "You know what bothers me about you, Montenegro?" she had said, her dark eyes boring into his. "You have principles. You don't touch women and children. You don't sell drugs to kids. You punish your own men if they cross those lines. That makes you different from the others, and that makes you dangerous in a different way." At the time, Raphael had dismissed her words as the frustration of a cop who could not catch her target. But now, those words meant something else entirely. They meant she might listen. It took Raphael 2 hours to make contact through channels he had established years ago for exactly this kind of emergency. Dead drops, coded messages, procedures he had never expected to actually use. At sunset, they met in the underground parking garage of an abandoned shopping mall on the outskirts of the city. Sarah Chen stood beside her unmarked sedan, her hand resting on her holstered weapon, her eyes scanning the shadows. When Raphael stepped into the dim light, she drew her gun. "Jesus Christ," she breathed, her face going pale. "You're supposed to be dead. Disappointed?" Raphael asked dryly. Sarah stared at him, then at the emaciated little girl clutching his hand. Her eyes traveled down to Alina's exposed arm, to the constellation of scars visible beneath the sleeve of her oversized hoodie. The detective's expression shifted from shock to something Raphael had never seen on her face before. Pain. "Who did that to her?" Sarah asked quietly, her gun slowly lowering. "The world," Raphael replied. "The same world that tried to kill me yesterday. I need your help, detective. Help me get evidence against Marco DeVito, and I'll give you everything. Names, accounts, routes, enough to dismantle half the criminal operations in the Midwest." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her gaze moving between Raphael and Alina. "How?" she finally asked. "Marco has locked down everything. Your mansion, your offices, your accounts. Getting evidence from inside would be suicide." Raphael allowed himself a thin smile. "Rosa is still in the mansion," he said. "She's the only one who can get evidence from inside." Sarah made the call at midnight from a burner phone purchased with cash from a convenience store 3 neighborhoods away. Rosa Martinez answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and grief. "Mrs. Martinez," Sarah said carefully. "This is Detective Sarah Chen. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and I need you to not react, no matter what you hear. Can you do that?" A pause, then Rosa's voice, steady despite her confusion. "Yes, Raphael Montenegro is alive." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear Rosa's breathing become ragged, could almost feel the older woman's hand trembling against the phone. "Dios mío," Rosa finally whispered, her voice cracking. My boy is alive?" Sarah glanced at Raphael, who stood in the shadows of the abandoned warehouse they had claimed as their temporary headquarters. Alina was asleep beside him, curled up on a pile of old blankets, her teddy bear pressed against her cheek. "He needs your help," Sarah continued. "Marco DeVito orchestrated the bombing. Raphael needs evidence to prove it. Documents, account numbers, server addresses, anything you can find in Marco's office." "I will do it," Rosa said without hesitation. "I have worked in that house for 20 years. I have watched Raphael grow from an angry young man into the closest thing to a son I will ever have. The son God never gave me. I will find what he needs." That night, while Marco slept in Raphael's master bedroom and armed guards patrolled the hallways, Rosa Martinez crept through the mansion she knew better than anyone alive. She moved like a ghost in her black dress and white apron, invisible to the men who saw only a servant too old and unimportant to notice. She slipped into Marco's office, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would wake the entire house. The document shredder beside the desk was full. Marco had been careless, confident that no one would dare challenge him now. Rosa sifted through the ribbons of paper with trembling fingers. Most were unreadable, cut too finely to reconstruct. But near the bottom, she found it. A fragment that had jammed the machine, only partially destroyed. An IP address, a partial password, the words offshore in Cayman visible through the torn edges. It was enough. At 3 a.m, Sarah's burner phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Have information. Be careful. Marco hired 12 more gunmen from Detroit." The internet cafe was a relic from another era, tucked away in a crumbling strip mall on Chicago's south side. Its neon sign flickered pathetically, half the letters burned out. The interior reeked of stale cigarettes and burnt coffee, and the computers were ancient machines that wheezed and groaned with every keystroke. It was perfect. Raphael sat before a grimy monitor in the darkest corner of the establishment, his fingers hovering over a keyboard sticky with years of accumulated filth. The clock on the wall read 3:17 in the morning. The only other occupants were a homeless man sleeping in the corner and a teenage boy playing a violent video game with his headphones on. Alina sat beside Raphael on a plastic chair too big for her small frame. Her blue eyes were fixed on the entrance, scanning every shadow, watching for any sign of danger. She clutched her teddy bear with one hand and Raphael's sleeve with the other. She was standing guard, a 6-year-old sentinel protecting a Mafia king. Raphael focused on the screen. The partial IP address and password fragment Rosa had recovered were enough to give him a starting point. He had built this empire's digital infrastructure himself, designed every firewall, every encryption protocol, every hidden backdoor. Marco had never understood technology. He had always relied on Raphael for that. A fatal mistake. Within 20 minutes, Raphael had breached the outer security layers. Within 40, he was deep inside the network he had created, navigating through files and accounts like a ghost walking through walls. What he found made his blood boil. Marco had been stealing from him for 3 years. $45 million, siphoned away transaction by transaction into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The evidence was meticulously hidden, but Raphael knew exactly where to look. But the most damning discovery was a scheduled transfer set to execute at 6 a.m, $10 million, routed to an account in Cyprus. The payment to Victor and Nikolai for completing the assassination. Raphael's fingers paused over the keyboard. He could cancel the transaction. He could expose it immediately. But a better idea formed in his mind, something far more devastating. He redirected the $10 million to a frozen FBI asset seizure account, one that Sarah Chen had access to. The money would vanish into a government black hole, irretrievable. Then he locked the remaining $45 million behind a reverse biometric encryption, one that would trigger a complete fund deletion if anyone other than Raphael attempted to access it. Finally, he left a message, programmed to appear on Marco's personal computer the moment he logged in. "Dead men don't sign checks. The Russians will come to collect their debt. Sweet dreams, brother." Raphael leaned back from the keyboard, a cold smile playing across his bloodied lips. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly to Alina, "Marco will wake up in his own personal hell." The morning sun cast long shadows across the small plaza in Lincoln Park. Raphael and Alina waited on a weathered wooden bench near an old fountain that had long since stopped working. Pigeons pecked at crumbs scattered across the cracked pavement. They were supposed to meet Sarah here at 9. She would bring new identification documents, cash, and a plan for the next phase of their counterattack. Raphael's digital assault on Marco's finances had been launched successfully. Now they needed to prepare for the endgame. Raphael spotted a payphone across the plaza, a relic that somehow still functioned in this age of smartphones. He needed to confirm the rendezvous with Sarah, to make sure nothing had gone wrong. "Stay right here," he told Alina, squeezing her small shoulder. I'll only be 20 meters away. I'll be able to see you the entire time. Alina nodded, clutching her teddy bear against her chest. Be quick, she whispered. Raphael walked to the payphone, keeping Alina in his peripheral vision. He inserted the coins, dialed the memorized number, and waited. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 30 seconds with his back turned. The screech of tires shattered the morning calm. Raphael spun around to see a black van hurtling across the plaza, jumping the curb, scattering pigeons in a panicked explosion of feathers. Victor leaped from the vehicle before it fully stopped. His face was wrapped in fresh bandages, the skin around his eyes red and blistered from the fire, but those eyes burned with something far more dangerous than physical pain, pure hatred. Alina, Raphael screamed, dropping the phone and sprinting toward the bench. But he was too far, too slow. Victor grabbed Alina by her hoodie and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. The little girl screamed once, a sound that would haunt Raphael's nightmares forever. Her teddy bear fell from her grasp, landing in the dirt. Raphael was 5 meters away when Nikolai stepped out from behind the van. The pistol butt struck Raphael's temple with brutal precision. The world exploded into white light and searing pain. He crumpled to the pavement, his vision swimming, blood streaming down his face. Through the haze of agony, he saw Victor throw Alina into the van. He saw her pale face in the window, her blue eyes wide with terror. "Don't come for me," she screamed, her small fists pounding against the glass. "They have big guns. Don't come." The van door slammed shut, tires squealed. The vehicle roared away, disappearing around the corner. And then there was only silence. Raphael lay on the cold pavement, blood pooling beneath his head, staring at the empty space where Alina had been sitting just moments ago. The only person who had ever cared whether he lived or died was gone. Sarah found him 10 minutes later, still lying on the pavement, blood matting his hair to his skull. She pulled him into the back of her unmarked sedan and pressed a wad of gauze against his wound while he stared at nothing, his eyes hollow. "Raphael," she said urgently. "Raphael, look at me. What happened? Where's the girl?" Before he could answer, the burner phone in his pocket began to vibrate. Raphael pulled it out with trembling fingers. The screen showed an unknown number. He answered. "Hello, brother." Marco's voice dripped with barely contained hysteria. "Or should I say, hello, ghost." Raphael said nothing. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "You froze my accounts," Marco continued, his composure cracking. "You locked me out of my own money. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Russians are going to kill me. They showed up at the mansion an hour ago demanding their $10 million. "That sounds like your problem," Raphael said coldly. No. Marco laughed, a high-pitched, desperate sound. "It's your problem now, because Victor and Nikolai have something that belongs to you. A skinny little street rat with blue eyes. Ring any bells?" Raphael's heart stopped. "If you hurt her, shut up and listen," Marco screamed. "Here's how this works. You come to Montenegro Tower, 50th floor, your old office. You bring your biometric codes and unlock every single account. Then you sign over the entire empire to me. Every share, every property, every last cent." Raphael closed his eyes. "If you do that," Marco continued, his voice steadying, "I'll let the girl go. But if I see a single cop, if I hear a single siren, Victor will throw her out the window, 50 stories down. And you know he'll do it without blinking." The line crackled with silence. "You have 1 hour," Marco said. "Don't be late." The call ended. Raphael sat motionless in the back seat of Sarah's car, staring at the phone in his hand. The woman who had spent a decade trying to put him in prison watched him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. "Pity. Raphael," Sarah said quietly. "You can't do this. It's a trap. You'll walk in there and they'll kill you both." "I know," Raphael replied, his voice flat. "Then what's your plan?" Raphael turned to look at her, and in his steel-gray eyes, Sarah saw something terrifying. Not fear, not desperation. Resolution. "Give me 10 minutes head start," he said. "Then bring everything you have. SWAT, FBI, National Guard, I don't care. Storm that building with everything. And you? I'll keep them distracted." Raphael opened the car door. "Whatever happens to me, save the girl." Raphael Montenegro walked through the gleaming lobby of Montenegro Tower like a ghost risen from hell. The security guards stationed at the entrance stared in disbelief, their hands frozen halfway to their weapons. They had attended his memorial service just yesterday. They had listened to Marco's tearful eulogy. They had believed their boss was dead. Yet here he stood, his 3-piece suit hung in tatters, stained with blood and ash and the grime of Chicago's underbelly. His face was a map of violence, cuts and bruises marking every inch of visible skin. Dried blood matted his dark hair to his skull. But his eyes, his steel-gray eyes, burned with a cold fire that made even the armed guards step back. No one tried to stop him. Raphael walked past the reception desk, past the towering marble columns, past the portraits of himself that still hung on the walls. He stopped before his private elevator, the one that accessed only the 50th floor, the one that responded to no one's biometrics but his own. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The ride up took 47 seconds. Raphael counted each one, using the time to slow his breathing, to quiet the rage thundering through his veins. He needed to be cold now, calculating. Any mistake would cost Alina her life. The doors opened onto his corner office, the room from which he had once commanded an empire worth $500 million. Marco sat behind Raphael's mahogany desk, in Raphael's leather chair, wearing one of Raphael's tailored suits. He was trying desperately to project confidence, but sweat glistened on his forehead and his fingers drummed nervously against the armrest. To his left stood Thomas Reed, the elderly lawyer who had served Raphael faithfully for 15 years. The old man clutched a stack of legal documents against his chest, his face pale with terror and unmistakable shame. He could not meet Raphael's eyes, but Raphael barely registered them. His gaze went immediately to the far corner of the room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a vertiginous view of Chicago sprawling 50 stories below. Alina sat on the floor, her wrists bound behind her back with plastic zip ties. Her oversized gray hoodie was torn, her face streaked with tears. But when she saw Raphael step out of the elevator, her blue eyes widened with something that shattered his heart. Hope. Victor loomed behind her, his massive frame blocking the window. Half his face was wrapped in fresh bandages, the visible skin an angry red from the burns Raphael had inflicted. In his hand, a combat knife gleamed, its edge pressed against Alina's pale throat. Raphael looked directly at Alina. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment, willing her to understand the message he could not speak aloud. "I will save you, whatever the cost." "Sit down," Marco commanded, gesturing toward a chair positioned before the desk. A biometric scanner sat on the mahogany surface, its screen glowing blue, waiting. Raphael moved slowly, deliberately, lowering himself into the chair with the calm of a man who had already accepted death. His eyes never left Marco's face. "You know," Raphael said quietly, "I always wondered why you stayed so loyal all these years. 15 years of fetching my coffee, scheduling my meetings, managing my calendar. 15 years of standing in my shadow." Marco's eye twitched. "Shut up and put your hand on the scanner." "It must have eaten you alive," Raphael continued, ignoring the command. "Watching me build this empire while you did all the dirty work. Watching me take all the credit, all the power, all the respect. And you got nothing but scraps from my table." "I said shut up!" Marco slammed his fist against the desk, his composure cracking like thin ice. Raphael smiled coldly. "So when exactly did you start planning to murder me? Was it after the Hong Kong deal? The Moscow expansion? Or did you always know you'd betray me eventually?" Something snapped behind Marco's eyes. 3 years, he hissed, rising from his chair, his face contorted with rage. 3 years I've been planning this. 3 years of skimming money, building contacts, waiting for the perfect moment. The merger was supposed to be my coronation. You would die, and I would take everything, including paying the Russians $10 million to plant a bomb in my car. Victor and Nikolai came highly recommended, Marco sneered. Former Spetsnaz, very efficient, very expensive, but worth every penny to finally be rid of you. Raphael nodded slowly, as if considering a business proposal. "And the succession clause I signed last week?" Marco laughed, a high, manic sound. "You think you're so smart, Raphael? You're an idiot, a trusting, blind fool. I've been your loyal brother for 15 years, and you never once suspected. The clause was my insurance. The moment you died, everything became mine. Legally, permanently." Raphael's hand moved slowly toward his pocket. "You're right," he said softly. "I was a fool." He pulled out the burner phone. The screen glowed bright in the dim office. An active call, 2 connections, one to the Montenegro Tower internal broadcast system, the speakers that reached every floor, every office, every corner of the building, one to Detective Sarah Chen's FBI liaison. Marco stared at the phone, his face draining of all color. "Every word you just said," Raphael said calmly, "was transmitted to 112 employees still in this building and to federal law enforcement." Silence. Then Marco's face twisted into something inhuman. "You," he sputtered. "You." He spun toward Victor, his voice rising to a shriek. "Kill the girl!" Victor moved with the brutal efficiency of a trained killer. His combat knife arced upward, the blade catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows as it slashed toward Alina's exposed throat. His burned face twisted into a grimace of savage satisfaction. Alina did not scream. She did not cry. She simply closed her eyes and whispered words that shattered Raphael's soul. "Mama, I'm coming to see you now." Raphael exploded from his chair. He did not think. He did not calculate. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, propelled him across the room like a bullet fired from a gun. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw Victor's arm descending. He saw the blade glinting. He saw Alina's pale face, peaceful in its acceptance of death. He was not fast enough to stop Victor, but he was fast enough to get between them. Raphael threw his body over Alina's, wrapping her small frame in his arms, shielding her with everything he had. The knife plunged into his right shoulder. The blade sank deep, slicing through muscle, scraping against bone. White-hot agony exploded through Raphael's body, a scream tearing from his throat. Blood, warm and wet, poured down his back, but he did not let go. He clutched Alina against his chest and rolled, carrying them both away from Victor, away from the window, leaving a smear of crimson across the marble floor. Victor yanked the knife free, blood dripping from its edge. He stalked toward them, ready to finish the job. Touching, he sneered in Russian. "You can die together." He raised the blade, and then the world exploded. The massive windows shattered inward as shaped charges detonated along the frame. Glass rained down like diamond shrapnel. The roar of helicopter rotors filled the room as SWAT officers rappelled through the breach, their black tactical gear stark against the Chicago skyline. "FBI, drop your weapons!" Sarah Chen's voice cut through the chaos, her pistol trained on Victor's chest. Victor spun, knife raised, and charged at the nearest officer. 3 shots rang out. Victor crumpled to the floor, his burned face frozen in eternal rage. Across the room, Nikolai reached for his weapon. 2 more shots dropped him before his hand touched the grip. Marco scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, falling to the floor in a pathetic heap. "Please," he screamed, tears streaming down his face. "Please, I surrender. Don't shoot. It wasn't my idea. They made me do it." The coward who had murdered his brother for $500 million sobbed like a child as officers forced him to the ground and locked handcuffs around his wrists. Sarah rushed to Raphael's side, shouting for a medic. But Raphael did not hear her. He lay on the blood-soaked marble, his shoulder burning with agony, but his arms still wrapped protectively around the small girl pressed against his chest. "Are you hurt?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with pain. "Alina, are you hurt?" Alina looked up at him, her blue eyes swimming with tears, her whole body trembling. "You," she choked out, her tiny hands pressing against his wounded shoulder, staining red. "You used your body to block the knife for me." 6 months later, spring sunlight flooded through the tall windows of the Montenegro mansion, painting everything in shades of gold and warmth. The house that had once been a fortress of cold power now breathed with life. Raphael stood in the garden doorway, watching the morning light dance across the manicured lawns. He no longer wore his signature 3-piece black suits. Today, a simple white linen shirt hung comfortably on his frame, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the thick scar that snaked across his right shoulder, a permanent reminder of the night he had chosen a little girl's life over his own. "Good morning, Mr. Raphael." Rosa Martinez appeared beside him, carrying a tray of fresh coffee. Her eyes, once clouded with grief and fear, now sparkled with a joy that seemed to have taken 20 years off her face. "Rosa," Raphael said, turning to face her. "I've been meaning to speak with you. Your salary has been tripled, effective immediately, and I want you to know that you are no longer an employee of this household." Rosa's face fell. "Sir, you are family," Raphael continued, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The son you never had has finally come home, and he will never forget who stood by him in the darkness." Tears spilled down Rosa's weathered cheeks as she embraced him, the coffee tray forgotten on the nearby table. The doorbell chimed, and moments later, Detective Sarah Chen walked into the garden. She wore civilian clothes today, a rare sight, and carried a manila folder in her hands. "It's done," she announced, handing Raphael the folder. "Marco DeVito has been sentenced to 85 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. He'll die behind bars." Raphael opened the folder, scanning the documents. "And the Russians? Victor and Nikolai have been extradited to Russia. They're facing charges for previous crimes there." Sarah paused. They won't see sunlight again. Raphael closed the folder and set it aside. Justice had been served, but it felt strangely hollow now. His eyes drifted toward the garden. There's something else, Sarah said, a rare smile crossing her face. Your charity foundation, the one you started with, that $55 million donation? They've completed 3 children's shelters across Chicago. Hundreds of homeless kids now have beds, food, and education. The media is calling you the reformed king. Raphael almost laughed. Reformed. That's one word for it. Your company stock has increased 300%, Sarah added. Turns out, the world loves a redemption story. But Raphael was no longer listening. His gaze had found Alina. She sat on the wooden swing he had installed beneath the old oak tree, gently swaying in the spring breeze. She wore a white dress with small flowers embroidered along the hem, her golden hair clean and shining in the sunlight, her cheeks finally showing the healthy pink of a child who had known consistent meals and safety. But in her lap, she still held her mother's old wicker basket. Raphael walked across the lawn and knelt before her. Are you ready? He asked softly. Alina nodded, her blue eyes bright. Together, they drove to the family courthouse downtown. The halls smelled of old wood and paper, the kind of institutional scent that usually made children nervous. But Alina walked beside Raphael with her head held high, her small hand wrapped securely in his. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, reviewed the documents before her. Then she looked up, and her expression softened. By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, she announced, stamping the final page with a resounding thud. I hereby declare that Alina is now legally the daughter of Raphael Montenegro. Congratulations, Miss Alina Montenegro. Alina stared at the judge, then at the document, then at Raphael. And for the first time since her mother died in that frozen alley, she let herself cry. Papa, she whispered, the word breaking free like a bird escaping its cage. Papa. Raphael pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, his own tears falling silently into her golden hair. That evening, father and daughter stood on the observation deck of Willis Tower, watching the sun sink below the Chicago skyline. The city sprawled beneath them, a glittering tapestry of lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Raphael rested his chin atop Alina's head, his arms wrapped protectively around her shoulders. All of this, he murmured, gesturing toward the endless cityscape. All $500 million, all the power, all the empire I built. None of it is worth a single heartbeat of yours. Alina leaned back against his chest, watching the colors bleed across the sky. Mama told me never to let anyone die alone if I could save them, she said softly. I kept my promise to her. She tilted her head up to look at him, her blue eyes shimmering. And now I have a papa. Raphael kissed the top of her head. And now, he whispered, I have a daughter. The little girl had heard the guards speaking Russian and saved a Mafia boss from certain death, but in truth, she was the one who had been saved. She had found a family at last. And the man who once ruled through fear had learned that love is the most powerful force in this world. Sometimes the smallest hands can pull us back from the darkest edges. Kindness costs nothing but can save everything. Family is not always about blood. It is about who stays when the world falls apart. And redemption is always possible for those brave enough to change. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our daily uploads. Give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. We would love to know how this story made you feel. Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness changed everything? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories inspire us, and we read every single one. Thank you for being part of our community. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in every single day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.